Good evening. My name is Alex, and I am an OFIS staff member. We're delighted to gather everyone together again for this month's community talk hosted by our Future is Science. This series is part of the Mentorship, Ambassador, and Champions programs of our Future is Science. We're also happy to welcome the public as Zoom allows us to democratize these programs. OFIS is an initiative between the Aspen Institute's Science and Society program, a nonpartisan organization. We are committed to sparking curiosity, passion, and confidence about STEM in young people to push science forward in the 21st century and solve society's most pressing issues. We're generously supported by Amgen Foundation, the Samweli Foundation, Burroughs Wellcome Fund, 3M, and the Carson Family Charitable Trust. Without these funders, none of this would be possible. The Community Talk series is a platform to expose individuals to diverse careers, as well as information, insights, and perspectives on the intersections of STEM disciplines and social justice issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tess, one of our OFIS ambassadors, who is hosting tonight alongside Paloma, and she'll be introducing tonight's talk.
Thank you, Alex. The title of tonight's talk is Mapping the Future, Geospatial Solutions and Data Innovation. Aisha Jenkins is a seasoned GIS professional with 25 years of experience in information technology, specializing in GIS and tech equity. She holds a BS in biology from Penn State University and an MS in information science from the University of Pittsburgh. Aisha is an adjunct professor at Howard University, where she develops GIS courses and supports the university's growing GIS program. She co-founded North Star of GIS to advance diversity and inclusion in geospatial sciences and hosts the GeoSTEM-focused podcast North Star Gaze. Additionally, as founder of the STFM Tech Equity, she helps organizations address systemic disparities and foster equitable technological solutions. We're also excited that this will be a great opportunity to interact with our speaker to help you move forward with your capstone projects. Let's welcome Aisha Jenkins.
Well, thank you for having me. It doesn't matter how many times you give a talk. When you give a talk in front of people, the first words out your mouth are just nerves and giggles. And so I am one of those people. And it's one of the things that I would tell any other adult as you're entering into these STEM fields where you don't see a lot of people who look like you, make sure you show up as yourself. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen and get into this, what will hopefully be an engaging conversation. And so I am a GIS professional, and so I got started, well, I'll go through this agenda, basically who I am and tell my story kind of in my own voice. I'll talk about what GIS is, and I'll talk about my pathway to GIS. It wasn't a straight line path. And I think when you're earlier in your career and you're going through your education, you might get the impression that most people put one foot in front of the other and that their career path is a straight line. And that is not always the case. There are many pivots that people make in their careers before they get to the place where they feel confident that they're doing what they feel like they should be doing. And it took me about, I'd say maybe 20 years to get to that point. And I'll go into that with my career path. I'll talk about why MATs need us, diverse voices, and that means diversity across as many spectrums as possible. And then the career options in GIS. I spent most of my career in one corporate location, in one corporate entity, but I've worn many hats within that entity, and now I've stepped out on my own. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that feels like, how fear can sometimes mask your courage, and then what do I do with GIS today, now that I've made a career pivot. And then I want to encourage you that you don't have to wait until you get to a college program to start working with GIS. And so I'll play this little game where I connect you to the GIS that you are currently using, because it is the most ubiquitous technology. It's all around us. We use it almost every day, but we just don't call it GIS. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And then I'll give you a little mission. I tell my students at Howard that once you understand GIS and once you know how to look at the world through a GIS lens, you can't not see GIS everywhere you go. And then I'll have some open Q&A. Throughout this talk, I'll try to infuse your different capstone projects. I understand that we're working with health biases, health equity, mental health, opioid crises, and empathy, LA wildflower fires. We'll talk about. I'll try to touch on a little bit of each thing as I go through this talk. I'll show you some GIS applications to kind of just get you excited about the things that you can do on your own and what's available to you for free. Okay, and so let's get into it. Okay, so I'm Aisha Jenkins, and I would say I started out as a kid in New York City, East New York, Brooklyn, and I probably statistically should not be here. And what I mean by that is that I lost my parents by the time I was 15. And when you're 15, you're going through what is the variety of teenage angst anyway. And so I kind of lost my safety netting, and that gave me a particular lens and a way that I navigated the world. And if you've ever experienced a loss, you could be shaken to your core. And what I tell people is that I was surrounded by a lot of good people in my life and a lot of adults. My teachers, they really embraced me. And so to this day, I hold teachers in the highest esteem because without them, I would not be here. And so I went from East New York, Brooklyn to St. Albans, Queens. And that's kind of where I did my high school. I went to college, graduate school. I'll go into that a little bit more. So I went through all of those changes and all of that insecurity. And I ended up on the back end, fast forward 25 years later, I am a GIS educator. I had the career of my dreams, and I still feel like I'm living the career of my dreams. And then I am also an advocate. And I've really talked to people about being advocates in place because sometimes you look at yourself and you're like, what can little me do to make change? And there, I mean, if you're in a place where you see injustice happen, you could be that advocate in place. And so it's the little nose, it's the little arm to move somebody out the way or stop somebody from tugging somebody's hair. And just in those little actions, we could be we can be advocates in place. And so the way that I ended up on the path of DEI advocacy was that I was in the right place at the right time to do what I did best. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Fun fact about me, I'm a backyard gardener. Gardening is something that I've always wanted to do. There's something about getting your hands in the dirt after a hard day and letting the minerals of the earth kind of ground you. And I say that my garden is a classroom because it is something that I use as a teaching tool with my own kids. One of my children has a form of dyslexia. So there was a period when we were trying to diagnose her that we needed to figure out how to bridge the gap between her being shaken by not reading at the same pace as her peers to giving us time to diagnose what was going on and then get a plan put in place. Now, through my garden, I was able to build confidence in her. She was able to feel very confident in what she knew about the environment, what she knew about science, what she knew about physics, what she knew about chemistry, all through being able to work in our backyard garden. And so for me, the garden is just one big classroom. All right, so that's enough about me. So I'm going to pause here. And is this where I pause? Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what GIS is. And to have that talk, I am going to pop into a mapping application. And so in my intro, I started my life in New York City. And then I ended up in the suburbs of Queens, New York, with a wonderful foster mom who nurtured me into a strong young woman who ended up going to college in, hang on, I'm trying to look for Erie, Pennsylvania. So I went to Penn State at Penn State Barron campus in Erie, Pennsylvania. I studied there, and one of my favorite classes was a limnology class. And as you can see, Erie, Pennsylvania is right on the border of Lake Erie. And so the limnology class, we would go out on canoes and we would take water samples and we would bring the water samples back into the lab and we would do some analysis. I graduated from the Penn State and then went on to grad school in the University of Pittsburgh. And then when I started my career, I got a job working for Esri, which is the GIS software leader. I started in one position and then I just changed positions, but I got my foot in the door with their Philadelphia office. And then I moved to, where is DC? I moved to the DC area. And so that is pretty much my journey. I'm a Northeastern girl, and this is the first look at a digital map. And this mapping software is available for free. It's an online software. All you need to do is just log in and create an account. And this is called ArcGIS Online. And it is meant to be a gateway into GIS, a low entry point where users can get into a GIS software and start doing some work. So I'm going to pause there and go back to the presentation. I talked about GIS, and you might be asking yourself, well, what is this GIS thing, right? What is GIS? Think of GIS as, let's see. Okay, so let me take a step back. GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. Now, I'm going to put a period at the end of that sentence and then take you on a journey, a knowledge journey that I kind of went on. All right. So I guess just in your head, how many of you know the term NASA? Okay. How many of you know about the civil rights movement? How many of you know a person by the name of Dr. Gladys West? Okay. So if I was about your age, like 19, 20, early 20s, between 15 and early 20s, I knew what NASA was and I knew what the civil rights movement was, but I didn't know who Dr. Gladys West was. And I really didn't key in on who Dr. West was or what she would mean to my career until about maybe 10 years ago. So Dr. Gladys West and Einstein are the two people who are credited with the GPS technology, which underlines geographic information systems. So all information systems, all geographic information systems are based on XY coordinate locations, and they're all built on top of this GPS technology. And GPS started out as a military technology that was then released to the general public. And so when I work with GIS, I'm a GIS professional, I'm a Black GIS professional, and it took a very long time for me to even know who was the mathematician behind GIS. And it would have been great for me to learn that sooner in my career, earlier in my career, than later in my career. But I have a wonderful story about that. Now, going back to GIS and Dr. West, how many of you saw the movie or heard of the movie Hidden Figures? Okay, so I'll bring this story full circle. Hidden Figures told the story of the number of Black men and women who participated and contributed to large advances in science. In particular, we were taking part in the space race. And so when I talk about NASA and I talk about the civil rights movement and Dr. West was part of NASA's integration of the space program in order to win the space race. And so, whereas we know about the 3 hidden figures that were profiled in the movie Hidden Figures, there are a number, hundreds of other hidden figures, and Dr. Gladys West is one of those. We didn't find out about Dr. West's contributions until she was about 79. And so, where all this comes into play, NASA, the civil rights movement, Dr. Gladys West, and Aisha. So that's the evolution. But so when you think about GIS, I want you to think about Dr. Gladys West and her contribution. But we all use GIS, and it's so ubiquitous. It's around us. We just don't call it GIS. And I'm so frustrated with the geospatial industry for extracting GIS to a point where people who use it every day don't feel as if they can engage with the actual technology as a means of earning an income. How many of you have a smartphone? And when you open up something like Google Maps, Waze, Google Maps and Waze are what I typically use. Or if you get a new cell phone and it says, do you want to enable location, right? Location analytics is basically a GPS that tracks you, right? And so the industry doesn't tell you that you have a handheld GPS unit in your hand, right? You have handheld GIS technology at your fingertips. But we don't know it because our role is to just give our information, our location-based information away, and it's very extractive instead of just calling it what it is, GIS, location-based data, so that we can also participate in the democratization of this data that is being collected on us. So every time when you turn on your phone, or let's see, if you take a picture with your smartphone, do you know that location is also being captured with that picture? And it's called geotagging, right? So we get geotagged, right? If you carry your cell phone with you, all right? And so there are ways that 911 operators can find your location based on your phone. It's a flip of a switch, right? And so I'm currently doing data ethics research with one of the California-based universities, because is something, if you can turn something on and off at will, think about that, what it means in terms of free will, being able to participate in the process that is collecting data on you. Okay, but GIS is basically geographic information systems. It takes location and it combines it with data, and then it helps people make better, more informed decisions. And those people can be us, as well as corporations, as well as medical professionals, as well as research scientists like we'll talk a little bit about we'll talk about Vernice Miller-Travis. We talk about Dr. Bullard when we talk about environmental justice applications. And so this is GIS. GIS is one of the most powerful technological tools that are out there. And when we think about what is going on with social media and data, right? All of that data is tied to a location. And they're fighting over it. It's powerful. And so once you have data, it allows you to go from just anecdotal stories, right? So if you listen to the Vernice Miller-Travis audio that I sent, Vernice Miller-Travis was a community activist in Harlem, New York, and she fought in order to capture data about a wastewater treatment plant that was being placed in her neighborhood. And she was working with community members who were complaining about high incidences of asthma. And so through pushing and fighting the system, Bernice Miller Travis and her group got the EPA to give them sensors to track PM 2.5 particles to see if what they thought was happening in their community was actually happening. And what they found and what they were able to prove using GIS technology is that they not only had the highest levels of PM 2.5 in their community, they had the highest levels in the entire Northern Hemisphere. This gave them the data that they needed to fight, sue, and win environmental justice for their communities. So when you think about the power of data and maps, it is very powerful and it's at our fingertips, but we don't always know it. And so I'm here to inform you of that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about my career. So my career did not go in a straight line. When I told my story, I ended up, college had always been an option for me. Even when my parents were alive, I didn't grow up affluent, but I knew I was going to college. I didn't exactly know how. But when my life got interrupted by the loss of my parents, I I ended up in the suburbs of Queens. That allowed me to really heal. That allowed me to lean in to being a teenager. I joined the track team. I was an honor roll student in high school, middle school when everything happened. I just stayed on my trajectory. I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was going to pay for college, but I had a lot of knowledgeable adults around me and a diverse pool of adults. To this day, I credit them with my success and keeping me on the straight and narrow. And so when I graduated and I went to Penn State, I studied biology. I had a chemistry minor. And yes, I throw in the chemistry minor because it was hard. And so, but when I graduated, I didn't really have, I was one of 3 Black students in my biology program. And so I didn't really have a lot of people helping me to figure out what came next. And I knew I didn't want to be a PhD. And so when in doubt, I went back to school. So I went back to school and I stumbled upon information sciences because I wanted the challenge. And then one of the classes that I took was a GIS class. So I did not get introduced to GIS until I was about 22, and it was by accident. And that one class changed my entire career and life trajectory. I didn't know at the time that going to work for Esri would be kind of tech, right? And so now we have people running into tech fields, but I was in tech when it was not glamorous and it was not lucrative. It was something I was passionate about. But I didn't know that the opportunities that I would have in that job and in that role would change my entire outlook. And so I started at Esri as an account manager, which means I was a salesperson. I was a junior level salesperson. I hated sales. I was not good at sales. And so I always wanted to do teaching because when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, I conducted GIS workshops for teachers. And that was what I wanted to do. And I thought doing that at Esri would be the bee's knees. It would be the absolute best. And so that's kind of where I focused. Eventually, I ended up getting that job. And I knew that I didn't particularly care for the job, but it was a foot in the door. And so, again, that's where my line started to get crooked. It wasn't a straight line. And so I worked at Esri. At about the 18-month point, I transferred to the Philadelphia office where I stayed for 10 years. And I moved into the training department. And that's where I spent my time as an instructor who traveled across the globe teaching GIS courses to adults. So it was a corporate training classroom. And so that was like the best job ever. Still, even looking back, the people that I met teaching, the confidence that I felt being the most knowledgeable person in the room, and what I learned, the way that I got to be exposed to what users were doing with GIS, like they had real jobs doing really important GIS stuff like tracking plume. So if chemicals were released into the air, they could do plume tracking. They're tracking populations, like there's a difference between populations in the city during the day and a difference between populations in the city at nighttime. And so it was just fascinating to me. And so one of my favorite parts about teaching was asking the students to go around and talk about what they were doing with GIS. And so then I wanted to shift into possibly starting a family. And I think I had reached a point where I got tired of the travel and having a go bag, which is like a little suitcase that I kept half packed whenever a training came up. And so I then moved into a leadership role. And so people tell you to aspire to leadership. It's not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart. So I stayed in a leadership role for 10 years. And then I moved into, so this entire progression from being an account manager, I was an account manager for um, education sales. And then I went into the classroom where I taught technology. And then I managed instructors. Then I managed a team of technical instructors. Then I became a project manager who oversaw the update, maintenance, and creation of new course projects. And so that gets me probably to the last 2 years, 3 years of my career at Esri, where we encountered the George Floyd situation, his murder. And we ended up as people of color, as Black people, as the few Black people in a company, we were in really awkward positions. We were mourning as a community. And so we came together and we informally formed an ERG group, which we called North Star, which was our code name, North Star. Um, and so we leaned on each other, we talked, we met, we became brothers and sisters, more than just work colleagues, but real brothers and sisters. We knew strengths and weaknesses. It was a home within a home. And if you remember, we were all locked down. And so this gave us just an opportunity to really delve into each other's lives. We got to see kids pop up on the screen. And so out of a terrible event and a terrible time period, we were able to birth a nonprofit that is called North Star. And through North Star, I helped to develop, I think, 22 racial equity tutorial trainings through Esri, which is available if you go to the Esri website, and I'll just pop you over there. Um, it's just been a wonderful journey. And so some of this stuff didn't even exist. And I remember interviewing for a job, and I said, I created 25% of the training that's available. And it was someone who did not look like me, who incredulously looked at me and said, 25%? How did you do that? And again, if you recognize a microaggression, I was like, I created something that didn't exist before me. And so he could not believe it. But let me just pop over because I use these in teaching my class at Howard. And then I also use it as part of my consulting knowledge, because one of the things that can never be taken away from you is your knowledge and your voice. And I use both to let me see if I can find it. If I find it, I will come back to it. But I use both to develop. So I use my the consulting work that I did for Esri for those 22 racial equity trainings that are available for free. So I will make sure to leave Ebony with the link to that. And so I used it to, this university wanted to modernize their GIS curriculum. And so I was part of the committee, and I saw them going in a direction that I thought could use a little bit of spice a little bit more truth telling, a little bit more honesty with mapping. And in order to change the system, you have to sometimes be in the system and have a seat at the table. So I had a seat at the table, and I kind of said, I tried to explain to them what was missing, and I said, here, give me that work, give me that thing that you're doing, and let me just show you. So I put together some ethical things. And so these ethical lessons I authored. And so I put myself in a position to get credit for my work. And so I wrote the ethical lessons that are now available in shaping the minds of students going through this particular GIS program. And my goal, I'm Pinky in the brain, and I'm going to take over the GIS world, is to work from both ends of the spectrum. I am a Black woman trying to tell the story of marginalized individuals and holding accountable the future generations of GIS, because where I saw this going was that people were saying, we know that something is missing here, but it's okay, or we know that we don't have all of the data, but that's okay. And I had to ask the question, but is it? Right? We're talking about accessibility. We know that we don't have information on accessibility, so we're going to go and look at people who have the ability to. But that's okay. We'll do the other stuff later. And so I kind of asked them, what if we flip the script and we did the later thing first? So kind of working from the margins on our way in. And to me, that is equity, right? And so I did that work. I did work that only I could do, right? So kind of coming from this long career, being birthed out of this horrible 2020 year, and out of all of that frustration, a group of us just really had to channel that energy into something that was going to be a living legacy. And we're still all a part of North Star GIS, but we've each branched out to expand the reach of when we talk about increasing representation in the field of GIS. And so back to the presentation, because it looks like we might be running a little short. So I'll make the rest of this a bit quicker. So maps need all of us. Maps and map making and GIS and analysis, it needs all of our perspectives, because sometimes we can see things that other people can't. And so while we're in a time where systems are trying to erase history, we're not going to let that happen. And so we're not going to erase the historical injustice of redlining, because redlining still is the backbone of so many disparities that we see and we experience in a day-to-day. It was by no coincidence that in Harlem, New York, where it's the epicenter of Black community life, had the highest PM2.5 particle rate in the entire Northern Hemisphere. It is not by chance, right? It is not by chance that Seneca Village was displaced to put Central Park. And Seneca Village was a thriving African-American neighborhood in New York City that was displaced for Central Park, right? And so we're not going to let these types of historical injustices go. But then it's also like modern challenges. During the pandemic, we realized there was a digital divide, right? We started looking at how many children had access to internet, how many children had internet at home, had laptops, access to tablet computers at home. And then we had to fix that in order to move our education system, and we didn't fall too far behind with the pandemic. And at the time, I had a kindergartner, and it was interesting, right? But I could not have imagined being able to get her through her education without internet access, keep her entertained without a laptop or a tablet, right? So we are still being impacted by When you think about internet and you think about infrastructure and you think about how neighborhoods are prioritized in terms of whose infrastructure gets updated, who gets to participate in digital learning, distance learning, so that your education is not interrupted by a pandemic, right? Representation matters, diversity matters, your stories matter, and you can tell your stories the way that only you can. And while I sit here sounding as confident as I do, I am never the loudest person in the room. But when I have something to say that only I can say, my voice goes from a soprano to a deep bass, right? It's okay, a tenor. Um, okay, so you want to get paid to map the world. What do careers in GIS look like? So I kind of took you through a whole range. I worked at a GIS company, so I did education sales for GIS technology. I was an educator in the classroom, and then I taught adjunct for a college in Ohio. I taught adjunct for the UPenn. I taught adjunct for Howard University, right? So I took my GIS skills and I took them into an academic setting. I've given workshops for K through 12, GIS analytics. So when you think of policies and how cities and programs are funded, that money has to be allocated. And we've been pushing up until this year for an equitable allocation of funds and resources. So giving the most to the areas that are most in need. We're getting a lot of pushback on that now, but it's not going to stop the work. We're only as strong as our most vulnerable. And then GIS managers. So within these departments, city departments, they need GIS managers, people to help direct the projects. They need data managers, GIS data managers, because GIS data is structured in a very specific way. And then educators, directors. So GIS can be used in almost every career field. So when you think about learning GIS and you want to go into business or you want to go into healthcare, there's health equity, right? There is, you're trying to place a new store. You want to place a new store where it's going to get the most customers. How do you go about doing that? GIS gives you the data to make data-driven and data-informed decisions, and that's power. Okay, so what do I do now? I co-founded North Star GIS, where I also created the North Star Gaze podcast. And so what I realized was that we needed a broader reach. We needed a global reach, right? We have global communities that can all benefit from utilizing GIS and empowering them and their communities. So no longer are we going to just call it GIS. We're going to say location-based intelligence. You have it on your phone. If you have a smartphone, you can advocate and you can empower yourself to do work in your communities. I teach GIS, and then I started a consulting firm that allowed me to work on modernizing the GIS curriculum and inserting a stronger ethics into the course curriculum. And so that's kind of what I do today. I realized that I wanted to make bigger impact. I wanted to be part of the change. And so you don't have to wait until you get to college to start working with GIS. So we have a number of things that are listed here that are freely available. So let me show you a few things. We have one of my friends and a co-conspirator in the North Star ecosystem is works. Their account is National Geographic, and they've been working with National Geographic to kind of bridge the gap between the corporate use of GIS and the classroom. And so they've been putting together a series of story maps and maps at National Geographic Mapmaker to provide lessons, to provide student materials, instructor materials to help make getting GIS into the classroom easier. So this is one, I think I showed some National Geographic Mapmaker resources when I spoke with the team earlier, but these are just more fleshed out versions of lessons that can be used. So they've done a lot to try to make GIS more accessible, and these are using ArcGIS Online. They're using already pre-made and pre-configured maps to make things easier. And I'll go back to this map that I created. And so I just threw some US cities on the map. And so when we talk about data-driven, let me just show you, can I get access? What's behind this data? This is such rich data. Let me see if I can close this. Close these layers. This is such rich data. So and we're pulling in census data. So we have, okay, so I put a filter on this. So let's clear this filter. So now I'm looking at all of the major cities in the United States. And it has all of this information that's stored with it. So this is pretty generic information. But behind every point, line, and polygon you see on this map, there's a ton of data behind the scenes. So anything that happens on the Earth's surface happens at an XY coordinate location. Think about that. We need to decide where a new school goes. That school is going to be someplace on the Earth's surface, right? So GIS is so important and so powerful. Now, where we're seeing it in the Global South is, I spoke to somebody about this Map Kibera, and it is a community-based mapping project that is happening in Kenya, where the community came together and they wanted to put their community on the map because it wasn't there, right? There's a whole divide between technology available in the global north and the global south. And somehow we tend to leave, wherever there are people who look like me that are not in the US, they somehow get left behind on the margins. And we can't do that as a global society, right? We've got climate change. We need to do better. And so with the use of a handheld cell phone, this community was able to put themselves on the map, right? And if you're not on the map, people can say you don't exist. And we know that these communities exist. So this was just putting data on the map. This is a free available application. And so when I go to add data layers, I can add from data that I created, or I can add data from, this is Esri's version of an atlas. So it's a living atlas where organizations, communities can contribute data. So it is crowdsourced data. Some of it comes from the US Census, but it's been really curated and cleaned up for you to use. Most of the population data has been, I guess, categorized and sliced and diced for you, and it's stored in the form of American Community Survey data, which is updated more often than the 10-year census. I think it is different parts are updated over the span of 5 years, but this is community-based data. So household income, poverty status, the data has been disaggregated by race. So now you can start look at racial patterns of home ownership, vehicles, language spoken at home, and things of that nature, pure demographic information. You can get it. And so what I did was I did add some ACS data into this map, and I can drill down into the data. I can take a look at the tables that are in this data set and just see the rich amount of data that is stored in this table. So you see how small that bar is right here? All of this data has been disaggregated for you. So that means that somebody did a lot of work to make the data available and accessible to people wanting to do GIS mapping. I think I might be getting close to the end. but don't wait. Do it now. Have a small little mission. My question to you would be, I think, so I self-taught myself podcasting. I did a lot of learning GIS on my own, and I did it by giving myself a personal project. I think people delve into things that are meaningful to them, meaningful to their family. One of the first things people do when they open up a map is like they look for their home. Show me my home on a map. And the kids did that when I went to career day at my daughter's school. Pulled up a map and they're like, this is where I live. This is my home. This is the country that I'm from. Right. So my question to you would be, after this talk tomorrow, think about what's one thing in your community that deserves to be mapped or understood better. And I'm saying your community because as an insider, you have a different perspective on the beauty of your community. Your gaze about your community could be different, right? I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, and I played with all of the kids. I grew up during the 80s, right? I didn't know really that there was a crack epidemic going on around me, but I just enjoyed playing with my friends. I enjoyed walking to the supermarket and getting an ice cream cone. So if you were to ask me about my community, I would say my favorite part was walking to the ice cream store and getting 2 scoops of ice cream. To an outsider looking in, they might say, oh my gosh, that entire neighborhood needs to be demolished because, it's just, there's nothing there. But there are people, right? And so there's some value to you telling your story through your lens. So what is it in your neighborhood that deserves to be mapped or understood better? Never discount the value, the gravity, or the importance of your voice, because there are stories that only you can tell. And your job is going to be to find that story. And so once you find that story, you can use tools like, story maps to bring that story to life in a visual way. So if you have 30 seconds, take time to think about what in your neighborhood or some place that you spend a lot of time deserves to be mapped to be understood better. And then you have one idea, focus on something that's meaningful to you, and then get into ArcGIS Online and just start tinkering and adding data. And then you have infinite possibilities of where you can go, where you can take it. And I will tell you, when I taught myself podcasting, right, because you're going to be teaching yourself to some extent because you've got this thing that's really meaningful to you. I had no idea that I would be able to create a platform that could bring global voices together talking about GIS and talking about what they do. And it's amazing. And so when you think about what can I do with GIS, well, it starts here. Find something that's meaningful to you, get in there with the technology, tinker away. And before you know it, you're creating maps and you're sharing it with people, and then it becomes so infectious. And I think map boldly, lead bravely, multiply impact is what I want to leave you with. So you can find me on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn. Here's my email. I am open for questions.
Thank you, Professor Jenkins, for sharing your knowledge and your journey with us. So far, we have 2 questions. First, from one of our mentors, Brooke. As a fellow GIS person, I really appreciate you highlighting the ethical implications in GIS. What would you say are the biggest ethical considerations to keep in mind for those starting their GIS journey?
Okay, so I think I have 3 things. I want to say set the bar higher. And what I mean by that is that when I was working on the curriculum or whenever I was working at Esri, we knew we had incomplete data, but that's okay, and I think that there was this extension of goodwill that everybody's using, the technology and the data for good. And I think that we now see that GIS technology it can be used for good or it could be used for not good things. And I think we want to set the bar higher in terms of where we put that responsibility, right? The technology we're seeing with AI, that technology is not agnostic. Technology, embedded in technology, are the biases of those who create the technology. And so when I talk about using curated data, also understand that somebody else is telling a story about that data. So just kind of trust but verify, right? And then I would say think in terms of, even though we can do it, should we? Right? I don't think that we have enough people pausing before they move full steam ahead with technology because they want to advance technology. But I think that as technologists and GIS analysts and data people, if we don't pause and take the time to really think about the impact, it can do a lot of harm. And then I think we need to think about when trust is lost, right? Because in the beginning of social media, in the beginning of having tracking on our phone, we trusted systems and we trusted entities to protect us. And I think that we are currently living in a time where the people we entrusted with our data could potentially be using our data to harm us. And I think that these times that we are living in is giving us a real, true to life example of things that we don't want to do and we want to protect against. And I think that if you're at the point where you're an analyst or a data manager or a data creator, we need to have the conversation about data ethics, uh, kind of at the forefront, right? It can't be something that we save for later, right? So I think that we need to have these conversations about data privacy, data ethics, how do we protect our people, and then we build our systems and our programs and our research with that in mind. There's a lot. I live in Northern Virginia, and so there's a lot of people who, are just not participating in life because they've shared information or they can be tracked. And so yeah, so I think that yeah, those would be my three things.
We have another question from a mentee who says, from your perspective, have you seen the GIS field being inflated or neglected in terms of people choosing to go into it as a field? Is it becoming more competitive?
Repeat the last part, please.
Is it becoming more competitive, like as a question?
More competitive?
The field of GIS, or like in professionally, are more people getting into the field of GIS? Is it a competitive field to get into this sort of thing?
I think it is competitive in an artificial way, right? Like I said, teenagers can do GIS, right? It's on their phone. So I think that there are barriers that are being put in place to say you need this type of education in order to do GIS work. And that's not true. But what we are seeing is that because GIS is so ubiquitous, that it's a value add to any resume. So if I went to school for biology and never went to grad school, but I learned GIS on my own, it would be a value add to the biological research that I would do, because now I can take that data and I can place it on a map, right? I can go out with my phone and use Google Maps and just like capture my location and then ask it to give me the XY coordinates. I can take that and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And now I've got mappable data about whatever phenomenon I was in the field capturing, right? So we don't even need to have careers in GIS. There are career GIS professionals in different municipalities and different agencies. Yes, those people exist. But there are also people who work in real estate who use GIS, right? There are also people who work in banking who use GIS. There are people who work on oil rigs who use GIS. And so having that GIS background combined with whatever else you're doing with your professional career and education is going to give you a leg up. And I would say if you are like, just do a search for jobs that include Esri technology or GIS technology, and you're going to see quite a few jobs come up. So I don't think that the field has gone anywhere. Data is the new gold, as somebody said. And putting that data on a location is that is power.
Yeah, another question in the chat that I'm not sure there will be enough time to fully answer, but I'll still say it. It seems like on another matter, as a nonprofit, how are current world policies affecting GIS North Star? I'm curious about this specifically since my current workplace is an agricultural-based nonprofit, and half our funding has been cut, and our projects are very limited.
Yeah, that is a that's a big question. I will say that the organizations that North Star GIS work with, we've been a little bit more bootstrapped, and we've been working with organizations whose priorities align with ours. And we work with a lot of volunteers. So that's what I will say about North Star. My heart bleeds for a lot of the nonprofits who are out there who are suffering right now because their funding is being cut. I will say that the GIS professionals that I know are generous people, and we understand that the GIS work is not going to stop. And so when I showed you Kibera, that community in Kenya that's doing GIS work, they're doing it with bare bones. And so the need to learn and do GIS is not going to go away because funding goes away, right? We just have to get more creative about where we go to for funding. In the communities that I'm in, we're talking about the type of work we do in different ways. So whereas it might have been called racial equity, now it's being called equity work, or it's being called just different names, and different euphemisms are being used to, I guess, save the organizations to continue to be able to do good work. But there are lots in the GIS community, lots of folks who are talking about what to do as nonprofit organizations, as research institutes. I've talked to professors who've had to restructure their programs and move some people around, like key people who, because of the color of their skin, would be considered DEI hires. They clearly have skills, but because of the way that they present. So there are lots of talks going on. I think one of our biggest concerns is those who have funds are going to use those funds, right? And they're going to do good work. But the data is disappearing, right? I teach a course, and environmental justice. And so I go to the EPA website, the data is gone, right? So other conversations that are being had is, how do we secure this data? So we're living in interesting times where ethics work is happening around us. And it's given us a look at where we are limited just by our lack of imagination, or our desire to extend goodwill. And that is coming back to bite some communities. And so this next generation, or this next wave of GIS, we're going to think long and hard about how to protect the more vulnerable communities, because we still need their data. We're going to ask for their data, but those communities will ask in return, what are your ethics policies? What are your data privacy policies? How are we sure that you're going to protect us? Which is, scary for communities who don't always participate in data gathering. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but it's a lot to consider, and my brain is not big enough to see all of the aspects and to be part of all of the conversations. So yeah.
So this has been an incredible and important talk. Thank you so much, Aisha Jenkins, for spending this evening with us. To our audience, you can extend your appreciation to our speaker in the chat. And thank you all for attending this community talk. Please visit our website, ourfutureisscience.org, and follow us on social media to learn about our initiative, future events, and our educational campaign. And please to complete the attendance sheet in the chat. Thank you so much, Aisha. This was a great talk.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.